Well, Dan and Jen, Choctaw Tribal Police actually using a chainsaw to cut down branches from a tree behind me where a man has been hiding for several hours. Now, earlier this morning, this man was pulled over by police, and after he stopped, he jumped out of his car, running through a field, going to a pond, jumping in, swimming across to the marsh area. Rescue crews trying to corral him in, but they couldn't get to him. He got to the marsh area and climbed up a tree, and that's where he's been hiding for several hours now. Now, the Durant Fire Department and EMS, along with Choctaw Tribal Police, are on scene. Protesters marched to this intersection at California and Dixon and cut across diagonally to here, intentionally blocking a roadway, a Class B misdemeanor, punishable with up to 180 days in jail and up to a $2,000 fine. It was here at the Pradera Trailer Park in Howe where police were called after 3 shots were fired into the home of 23-year-old Dylan Lucas. He voluntarily let police search his home, and in their investigation, they found a 1/4 ounce of marijuana, 100 oxycodone pills, and a firearm that Lucas owned illegally. It's been 7 months since Sonia Green was found dead, beaten, strangled, and stabbed to death in her bed in this home behind me. Her daughter, Damaris Contreras, telling me to this day they don't know who her killer is. It was here on the 300 block of Carpenter's Bluff Road where Harold Speed Jr. was arrested. The Bryan County Sheriff's Office and the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics say he had 397 marijuana plants he was growing and stolen cultivation equipment. Now around 5:20 is when a store clerk came out. They knocked on the window, realized a man was dead in the passenger seat of the car, and called 911. Well, Chrissy, the family of David Trammell all gave their emotional testimony in the court today, telling Sean Michael Baumgartner to his face how much pain he's caused their family. Connie Adams was inside her home when she heard 10 shots ring out after being fired at 2 teens standing right here. When she came outside, one had been shot and was screaming in pain. Clayton Walker will spend the next 6 years in prison for a DWI crash that left Shelley Howard in a wheelchair. Curtin County Sheriff Kevin Clarity tells me 20-year-old Wendell Alexander shot a man multiple times in the abdomen in this yellow house you see behind me. The pilot of this helicopter that crashed in this field behind me is fine. The cause of the crash being called a rotor failure with the propellers. Now, it's unclear right now how many people were on board the helicopter in addition to the pilot. Last March, Denison police were stationed outside the Hilltop Village apartments where they believed a shooting suspect out of Bryan County was staying. And that's when they saw 2 men on motorcycles take off down the road. And just 6 miles away, 47-year-old Richard Wiggs crashed his motorcycle, and police found an ounce of methamphetamine in his front jacket pocket. To the south of this property on East 2090 Road is where Tom Walter White was conducting a controlled burn on property that he owns. When firefighters arrived on scene, they told White it was too dry to burn. That's when deputies say White told them to get off his property and threatened to close the gate with firefighters still on scene and the fire still burning. Simmons says this new system will be perfect for families coming in from out of town looking to visit their buried loved one. Instead of scouring the entire cemetery looking for a grave, they just have to plug in a name and they'll know exactly where their headstone will be. Now, this was one of those concrete spikes that was all over Highway 78 yesterday. Now, when it goes in, it cuts what's called the steel belt of the tire. Now, that's the inner lining that keeps the tire together. And when that happens, the tire is beyond repair. Now, TxDOT is adding main lanes to the highway, expanding those frontage roads, and just as they are here, even adding U-turns to these intersections. Now, drivers I spoke with today said some of their biggest frustrations are the constant opening and closures of those exit ramps that we were talking about, but TxDOT says get used to it because that construction is going to last for at least the next 8 months. former city council member told us that this type of corruption is exactly the reason that she got out of the city government to begin with. There is no question that there's an increased risk for crashes when this winter weather rolls through. According to AAA, around 46% of crashes involve some kind of inclement weather, but there's also a risk of breaking down, and AAA says that the dead battery calls are one of the most common that they get during winter weather scenarios. So one of the best things you can do is having a plan if the worst should happen. Nina OHP tells me this woman was one of 4 that went out jug lining near the Fob Bottom campgrounds around midnight last night. All 4 got in the water. She was the one that didn't resurface. Now, everyone I talked to was in favor of more housing coming to Sherman. That wasn't a problem, just not in that area. Now, as you can see, there are probably about dozens of people here at this meeting to learn more about this development, but no plans are final at this time. The city hopes this plaque stands as a reminder of what was lost and how far we've come since that day. The scene was actually just cleared and traffic kind of back to a standstill already, but what happened was a red car stopped abruptly in the middle of the highway, and that caused a 7-car chain reaction crash that shut down the highway.
Police are investigating a suspicious death of a woman from September of last year.
Her daughter spoke with News 12's Mike Rogers about what she's learned about the circumstances surrounding her mother's death and who could be responsible.
It's been 7 months since Sonia Green was found dead, beaten, strangled, and stabbed to death in her bed in this home behind me. Her daughter, Damaris Contreras, telling me to this day they don't know who her killer is.
And they knew, everybody knew that she's all we had.
The last time Damaris Contreras heard from her mother, Sonia Green, was September 8th of last year. 2 days later, she was found dead.
We don't know who she was with or if anybody was at the house.
Contreras says Green was face down on the left side near the foot of her bed when police found her. Her body covered up with blankets and blood everywhere.
Blunt, silly, she loved to crack jokes.
Green was stabbed in an undisclosed part of her body, and the medical examiner's office ruled her death a homicide by strangulation.
She was the life of the party, and that she loved me and my brother and my son like no other.
Contreras says Green was her best friend, a perfect grandma to her 2-year-old son, and raised her as a single parent in the very house where she was found dead.
I try not to think about it, but it's really hard when everything reminds me of her, because she was that person.
The investigation into Contreras' death is still ongoing. Anyone with information is asked to contact Denison Police. In Denison, Mike Rogers, News 12.
One man was shot and another man is on the run after a confrontation at a Sawyer home in Choctaw County.
Yeah, News 12's Mike Rogers spoke with the Choctaw County Sheriff about this incident. He's now live in the studio. So, Mike, what started this and what actually happened today?
Yes, Stone and Jen, Matt Rawson's brother had been staying at the home of Stephen Nichols' mother on the 900 block of Copperhead Road. Choctaw County Sheriff Terry Park tells me Nichols had taken issue with Rawson's brother staying with his mother. So he confronted them, then kicked in the door before they shut it in his face. And that's when Nichols fired a bullet through the door and hit Rawson in the neck area.
Mr. Nichols did not care or like that his mother had those 2 brothers there at the house.
So 24-year-old Stephen Nichols went to his mother's trailer home on the 900 block of Copperhead Road to confront 33-year-old Matt Rawson and his brother, who had been staying with his mom.
Kicks the door open. They shut the door back. About the time they shut the door, Mr. Nichols shot 1 round into the door, striking Mr. Rawson in the neck area.
Park says Nichols had several run-ins with Choctaw County deputies, including Christmas last year.
Deputies were responded also to another complaint in which Mr. Nichols was arrested for assault and battery by strangulation, assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, and obstructing an officer.
Now he's on the run. Rawson was taken by EMS to the Choctaw Memorial Hospital and was metaflighted to a Plano hospital for his gunshot wound and was released Wednesday. Park served both Matt and Cheyenne Rawson with eviction papers at the home where the shooting happened last Friday afternoon.
He had to come in and register as a sex offender.
Stephen Nichols has warrants out for his arrest for assault with a deadly weapon and shooting into a dwelling. Park says he believes Nichols may be going back and forth between Sawyer and Frogville in the southern part of Choctaw County and asks anyone who sees him to contact the Choctaw County Sheriff's Office. Live in the studio, Mike Rogers, News 12.